Good evening and welcome to our joint meeting of Action for You and Renewal, World Disarmament Campaign, supported by Commonwealth Journalists Association. I am Vijay Mehta, Chair of Action for You and Renewal and World Disarmament Campaign, and I am pleased to see dedicated activists keeping a check on the excesses of governments and our leaders. It is fitting to quote India's first Prime Minister Nehru, who said, and I quote, we are all little people who only deserve to be remembered because of the great causes we support. So what does our organization do? Our organization promotes nuclear and general disarmament, ending wars, urgent security council, reforms, and work for an effective, transparent, credible United Nations. We organize events like the one today, distribute literature, newsletters, briefings, and books. They're all for you to take away. They're all at the back. And we have got Afghan aid charity over there, David Hogan's paintings about Afghanistan over there, and I think Stop the War is here, or they are coming. Or Stop the War is here. We are a voluntary organization, and we depend solely on your support and members of the public. So donations are all that. Today, we are here to discuss the escalating war in Afghanistan. Can peace return to the troubled region? The war in Afghanistan, as we all know, escalating by the day, killing more US, British, NATO, and Afghan soldiers, and innocent and civilians. The war has spread to neighboring Pakistan, a country with nuclear weapons, and making the whole region the most dangerous place in the world. The war is going on for 8 years, actually it's on the 9th year now, and some predict it might last as long as 30 years. As the violence, bombings, and deaths continue in Afghanistan, the distinguished panel of speakers will explore the conduct of the war, the role of the media, United Nations and NATO, and we and the audience, we will all examine strategies and solutions for the Afghan war to bring back its golden age of peace and stability. Today's meeting is not an academic exercise for intellectuals. It's about results. And I would urge speakers and the audience to put forth recommendations which will be sent to the Ministry of Defense, Minister of Armed Forces, and the Prime Minister. So before I introduce the first speaker, or second speaker, because as you can see, the Bill Ramalanti, the Minister for Armed Forces, is not here, and he's on an overseas visit, and he prepared a speech which his office has sent to me, and I'm going to read that and then give the platform to our first speaker. So, he was asked to speak, why are we in Afghanistan? And that's what he says. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you this evening. Nevertheless, I did want to contribute to your debate by explaining why are we in Afghanistan. We are in Afghanistan because the Taliban gave safe haven to Al-Qaeda, which allowed terrorists to plan and carry out terrorist attacks around the world, including the atrocities of 9/11. That is why the UN authorized a NATO-led intervention. We are in Afghanistan because, as the Prime Minister reminded us in his foreign policy speech at the Mansion House last week, we will never forget the fatal Al-Qaeda-led attacks in London on 7th of July 2005, the unsuccessful Al-Qaeda-inspired attacks 2 weeks later, and the Al-Qaeda sanctioned plot to capture and behead a British soldier in the Midlands in January 2007. We are in Afghanistan because getting rid of the brutal Taliban regime and Al-Qaeda was only the first part of the job. The second is to make sure they cannot return. Right now, this means direct international military support, protecting the Afghan people, facing down the insurgency, and while our forces are providing security to the Afghan people, they are also building up the Afghan army and police to take on the job themselves. This is the most effective way to ensure that our forces can safely withdraw. We are also supporting the Afghan government's efforts to reach out to those who are willing to accept the democratic process and abandon violence and terrorism. And we are working relentlessly on all fronts to help the Afghan government improve governance, tackle corruption and the drug trade, build up the rule of law, promote economic development by investing in infrastructure, legal alternatives to poverty and jobs, and improve access to education and health care. This won't happen overnight. 20 years of war completely destroyed Afghanistan's infrastructure, economy and institutions. We need to rebuild the size and capacity of the state so it can protect its people, giving them physical and economic security so that foreign forces are no longer needed on the front line and Afghanistan can stand up to terrorism itself and offer its people hope for the future. At that point, our forces can come home. Now, some argue that Al-Qaeda is now located in the borderlands of Pakistan, so there is no point staying in Afghanistan. But if we were to abandon Afghanistan, who truly believes that they would not take root there yet again? Who truly thinks this would make Britain safe? We would just have to do it all over again. Some argue that we can somehow insulate ourselves, that we can retreat behind the walls of some fictitious fortress Britain. They are wrong. It would only be a matter of time before we felt the consequences of withdrawal. Afghanistan may be a distant country, but the brave men and women of our armed forces are protecting us from terrorist attacks just as much as the police and intelligence services do here in the UK. Some argue that Britain should pull out of the coalition and leave it to the Americans. No country can protect themselves on their own, not even America. This is our fight too. Imagine the damage our universal withdrawal would do to the NATO alliance that has been bedrock of our defense for 60 years. Some argue that our presence in Afghanistan gives us a boost to violent extremism around the world. But the greatest boost to that, their vicious ideology, would be for us to retreat now. Only by confronting this new, evolved, globalized form of violent extremism can we diminish its appeal. And some argue that Afghanistan is not the only nation where there is a risk of terrorism finding a place to take root. This is true. Our commitment to Afghanistan does not mean that we are failing to work with other nations to counter terrorism elsewhere. But the majority of the terror plots against the UK have connections to the border and mountain areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we must focus where the threat is the greatest. But our ultimate objective in 2001 holds true for 2009, to protect our citizens from terrorist attacks by preventing Al-Qaeda having a safe haven in the tribal belt in either Afghanistan or Pakistan. They must never again become a safe haven for terrorists. For us to be safe, Afghanistan needs to be secure. Pakistan needs to be secure. As President Obama, the Prime Minister, and 40 other countries have judged, that means Afghanistan is not a conflict of choice, but of necessity. Ultimately, that's why we are in Afghanistan. Bill Rebel, Member of Parliament. So people might have some questions, and that which they can factor to me, and by email I can send it to Bill Rambo, and when he's back from the overseas.